Okay, welcome everyone. While we're getting started, technically just to say you're more than welcome to join us here today. We're delighted to be at this stage of our Aclú project, which is a launch. We've been working for quite a number of months on the Aclú project. So for us, actually it's a very opportune time to have a launch. We feel really ready to get this off the ground and to share with others what we're doing and hopefully figure out mechanisms how some of you might get involved with us in the Aclú project. So we have a number of people joining us online. So thank you all for joining us in the room. I think there are more people online than there are in the room. And last count, there were about 15 countries represented, from Australia to the States to Europe to Africa. So 4 continents at least represented in our audience, and lots of people who are willing and interested in getting involved and getting engaged with the Aclú project. So I think that in itself is testament maybe to the need for this project and the appetite for this project, not just in Ireland, but in many other parts of the world. So our application of Aclú, to start with, is in the southwest of Ireland. Happy and proud to have our partnership with the HSE to support us in giving that fruition, I suppose, here in this region and in this district. To international best practice, and hopefully sharing that with other people who are around the world and learning from each other as well as we go in that journey. So we're still just in the process of getting things started here. So Maggie Cusack, Professor Maggie Cusack, President of MTU, has joined us today, and we're absolutely delighted to have you with us. So without further ado, I think it may be opportune for Maggie to welcome you all today.
I can walk away across the side. Yep.
Look at how adaptable we are to technical hitches. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, to be in the room in person, and to welcome you to the launch of this MTU and HSE initiative, Aclú. I think this is an absolutely vital step in addressing enduring mental illness recovery. And as Catherine mentioned, it's great to have people in the room. We also have people online, and I would just like to extend a very, very warm MTU welcome to everyone. It's great to be able to master technology, I know we will, to have the hybrid meeting and to really enjoy the benefits of both. So really a big thank you from me. Thank you for taking the time to celebrate this launch. This is really important for us to have this support, and also to provide you with the opportunity to learn about Aclú, how it will help those recovering from enduring mental illness through physical activity, through nutrition and digital technology. So for those of you who are new to MTU, our university was established last year, and Breda and I were just reflecting there and thinking about what an achievement given the extremely challenging circumstances that we faced. And I think it's all credit to everyone, staff and students, for their endurance and resilience and everything that they showed by way of their commitment to actually bring us to this point. So there's nothing trivial about our achievements thus far. So only established last year, bringing together 6 campuses across Kerry and Cork. Our student body now stands at 18,000. And although we are the newest university in the Southwest, our campuses have a really proud history of supporting the region's communities. So MTU was created to lead positive change in the Southwest and to empower people through education for a successful future in a globalised world. Addressing global scale problems at the local level is an ambition that also lies at the heart of Aclú, as Catherine mentioned, about all the international participants. So today, Aclú's global reach is evident in the range of speakers, our guests in the room, and those online from all over the world. Really fabulous. So MTU is a new university. in a new world. New opportunities have opened up for working collaboratively under the Technological University Transformation Fund, and the establishment of Aclú is evidence of exactly that. As we co-create Aclú, the MTU graduates and the collaborators with whom we work will be empowered to leave no one behind. As a university, we will commit to ensuring that MTU learners are equipped to succeed in their work in mental health and beyond. We will lead regional development with partners to advance practice for those most in need, and we will contribute to the mental health and well-being of our local communities. At MTU, we can well understand and wholeheartedly support Aclú's aim to shift the care paradigm from those with enduring mental illness by promoting sustainable, healthy, and responsible living. Our research, innovation, and entrepreneurship ecosystem will deliver impactful multidisciplinary research to advance mental and physical health outcomes. I mentioned that we have a global outlook as a university. In line with this, we plan to leverage our international networks and collaborative partnerships to advance human rights and sustainable development issues. Meaningful collaboration and partnerships help universities connect with the communities we serve. MTU's ambition is to be at the heart of advancing transformative changes in our society, economy, and environment for a better tomorrow. In embracing this challenge, MTU will listen, learn, and collaborate, embracing bottom-up approaches informed by the field to co-create new solutions to age-old problems. We can't do this without you, and for that reason, I want to sincerely thank our academic staff, our researchers and support staff, our colleagues in health, as well as our service providers and our service users. Thanks also to our steering committee and external advisory committee who have joined us in Aclú. We are very grateful to you all for pooling your resources and collaborating to deliver better outcomes for those with enduring mental illness. So unfortunately, I can't stay with you for the whole session, but I just want to end by saying I wish the project and everyone involved every success. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Maggie. It was a fantastic address, and thank you for your well wishes for this project, and indeed for the broad team who have joined us to bring this project together, and whom we hope will deliver results for people with enduring mental illness in this region and beyond. So really appreciate your nice words today, and thank you for joining us. I know you have an extremely busy schedule, so we do really appreciate it. We still are having a little technical issue, so as Liam is working to sort out the problem here, we'll just give you a little bit of background on Aclú and what the project is about, and even the term Aclú. So some of you in the room might know what it stands for. It's a very old Irish term that's about conditioning yourself through physical activity. So we use that term to describe this project because that's one of the elements that we really want to achieve. So conditioning yourself, so hence the Aclú. And empowering recovery in enduring mental illness is exactly the area that we're working on in the Aclú project. So those living with enduring mental illness are often some of the most marginalized in the community, and who don't maybe receive the attention and services that are needed in order to improve the health outcomes that they experience in their life. So they are the core audience of our Aclú project. So while there are many projects, initiatives, apps, programs, training around the area of mental illness and mental wellness, our particular project focuses in on this cohort who experience and live with enduring mental illness, who are particularly marginalized among those experiencing mental health issues. So this week is Sustainable Development Week. You may have noticed our icons around the room, and here outside, here alongside me, and outside indeed. And one of the core principles of the Sustainable Development Agenda is leave no one behind, starting with the most vulnerable or those furthest left behind. So sometimes within mental health, those living with enduring mental illness are among those furthest left behind. So what this project is aiming to do is ensure that as we progress with new services, new solutions, new research, new activity, that cohort is not left behind any longer, and that we really focus and direct our attention to those who in the past have been left behind, in keeping with the principles of the Sustainable Development Agenda. So that's just a little bit of a backdrop of where we're coming from and who exactly Aclú aims to serve. Maggie also mentioned that it is multidisciplinary. We are delighted to have colleagues from across. MTU has 6 campuses. We have colleagues from Cork, we have colleagues from Kerry involved in the Aclú project. And today is actually the first day we met in 14 months of meeting and engaging online. Today is the first time we've actually come together, and you know what affirms the, I suppose, the effectiveness of digital technology. You barely notice that you haven't met someone. We're so familiar with the face, the voice, the people that, you know, you hardly know that it's your first time meeting these people face to face today. So it's been a really good relationship, and long may it continue, because this is the start of a long journey. That's the intention of the technological university transformation projects, of which Aclú is one. And so we hope that this is very much the start of a long journey with all our colleagues. We're also delighted that the HSE have joined us as partners in this project, and Mairead Carlin was very much involved in instigating this partnership and bringing her colleagues indeed from the wider HSE group on board. And John O'Keefe indeed from Kerry is also possibly in the room. John is here as well. So we're delighted to have that partnership with the HSE and the direct link with service users within the HSE recovery teams, for whom the activities that we develop in the Aclú project are the direct stakeholder group. Mairead was very, very affirmative from the outset that this project needs to be a bottom-up development. We need to listen to those stakeholders on the ground as to what their experiences are, what their needs are, and develop the solutions that we're going to put on the table in line with what's acceptable to the stakeholder group that are our target audience. So just to give a little bit, I gave a little bit about Aclú. The UNESCO chair is another entity that you may not have heard of before, especially maybe some of you online, and indeed some of you in the room. But the UNESCO chair was established here 10 years ago. And our role is to look at how physical activity, sport, physical education is accessed by people, especially those who may be marginalized in their communities and have faced barriers in trying to access physical activity, sport, physical education, and the benefits that can be accrued through your engagement in those activities. So our role, we work very much with UNESCO in helping them to implement their international policy, especially as it links with marginalized populations. Obviously, UNESCO is one of the UN family group members, so we would link a lot with other UN agencies, WHO, for example, who would produce the guidelines on physical activity, UNDESA, who also have a remit around those who are socially marginalized in societies, UN Women, who look at the gender equality issue, and we would look at, I suppose, the intersection of various different issues for which people find themselves marginalized. So lots of different ways in which we connect with those with the UNESCO chair. So in addition to our UNESCO chair, we have other research centers from across campus. Tara is going to introduce you to all those people and groups in a few minutes, so I'm not going to go through it, but we're delighted to have this multidisciplinary group. And we really believe that that's the type of solution that's needed, as you will hear from our 3 keynote speakers. So we have Evan Matthews from the Southeast Technological University, who will talk to us about what the work that he has done. And then, which is fantastic work over the last few years, Kelly Ashbrimmer is joining us from the US, and Kelly also has done a lot of practical interventions with the stakeholder group that Aclú also targets. And she'll be talking to us later about her work and what she has found in her work. And Joe Firth will also talk to us about his work. And again, Joe has lots of different experience. I know he's going to talk a little bit about the digital link as well. Well, a lot about the digital link and physical activity. So there's a physical activity connection across everyone. And I think they're all dipping in and out of the other components of Aclú, which physical activity, nutrition, and digital. Tara, you were going to, so Tara is, there's a lot of people involved in the Aclú project, who Tara is going to introduce you to in a second. But I'd like to call on Tara, who's co-PI, as we call them in academia, a principal investigator for this project, to introduce you to the steering committee and the external advisory group of Aclú.
Hello everybody, it's lovely to have you all here and to those online as well. I'm just here really initially to just introduce you all to our wonderful steering committee and to thank our external advisory board. So our steering committee has got colleagues from across MTU and the HSD. So first of all, there's Catherine, there's me, we've got Mairead Carolan, a senior clinical psychologist with the HSD, and Elaine Bresnahan as her colleague is here as well. We've also got Sarah, Indica and Aisling here with us, and Michael Hall, the PhD, Michael Hall, their head of department from Health and Leisure as well. Thank you to Gerard and Sarah for all your work you've done in setting this up for us today. We really appreciate it. We've also got Breda O'Dwyer here, Director of SEED, and we thank you for the funding that you've allowed for us here to enable this launch to take place. We appreciate that very much. And we've also got John O'Keefe here as well from, I haven't met you yet, John, but you're here. So it's lovely to meet you. Thank you. And I'll meet you afterwards, I'm sure. And we've also got May O'Leary, who's a colleague of mine in the Department of Sport, Leisure and Childhood Studies in Cork. So we've got colleagues from across the Cork and Kerry campuses together, and it's wonderful. And as Catherine has said, to the fact that we've never actually met, and the project has worked so wonderfully so far. We've all met on weekly, and we've all grown, have fun at the same time, collaborating. It's wonderful to get to know people and get experiences. And I also have to say, it's wonderful to have the HSC on board, because then you have an idea of how something's going to work, and then you've got Mairead and Elaine who end up saying, that's not going to work, you have to do it this way. And that's the wonderful design of this project, and how we want to do the bottom-up approach. And we're really looking forward to the continuous collaborations and the weekly meetings that we have together to help steer this project forward. We also have our very first external advisory board meeting tomorrow, and we're very excited about it. So could we just move on to the next slide, please?
Aisling, I think.
Yes, thank you. So we've got John Farrelly here, who's kindly agreed to act as our chair for tomorrow. Thank you for that. We are really looking forward to hearing our keynote speakers that are also going to be there, Kelly, Joseph and Evan. And we've also got a wonderful broad spectrum of people. So we've also got Julianne from Enable Ireland here with us tomorrow for our meeting. We've got Brenda from Kerry Peer Support Network. We've also got Rachel Palmer, who is the adult mental health dietitian at the HSC, the only one in the region. So you can see already how that is a huge challenge for Rachel, who unfortunately can't be here today, but has a wonderful angle of approach that will help us develop this project, and the nutrition angle side of things and dietetics, because it's not just the mental health, it's the physical health of these service users that we would like to support this program with. We've also got Gerard O'Doherty from the Kerry Sports Partnership on board, and we've also got the Mayor of Tralee, Michael Sheehy, who's also going to be joining us. We have Pamela Wicker, and we also have Elizabeth Wycherley. So we have a wonderful broad spectrum of experts that are going to help us steer Aclú in the direction that it needs to go. And we really look forward to the outcomes of that meeting tomorrow and to feeding them back to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide. Aisling. I mentioned what the Aclú term is about and the origins of that term. So just to say, in relation to the area of enduring mental illness, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Mental Health affirms that we must move behind frozen biomedical models. And this is a statement from the UN General Assembly in 2020. The UN General Assembly are meeting again this week. And the inclusion of comments like this at the UN General Assembly reflects the evidence from research, from practice that had come heretofore. So this, and I suppose the Lancet Mental Health Commission review on mental health, produced and summarized a lot of the research outcomes that we have known around enduring mental illness for a long period of time. And the consensus is we're not doing enough. We need to do more. We don't need more research in some respects. We need action, and meaningful action that makes a difference to people's lives on the ground. So the fact that this is here again, being launched here today, I think is in response to those key calls that have come from UN agencies, have come from academia and the Lancet Mental Health Commission and stakeholders on the ground who recognize that the treatment and services that are available are maybe not enhancing their health to the best way possible, in the best way possible. So that's one of our primary aims around Aclú. So there's a lot of research into the background of it and why we've chosen this direction and this path. So what we aim to do with this is reframe mental health treatment, which is a system level approach, which is not the easiest thing to do, hasn't happened to date, but we're definitely, that is what we want to do with Aclú and make these changes sustainable into the future so as we're not at this stage again. We have the multidisciplinary approach. We're encompassing solutions that involve physical activity, nutrition, digital. More components could be added to that in time, but at the moment, they are 3 areas that the research evidence points to are really worth implementing in interventions that deliver positive health outcomes for people with enduring mental illness. They've never really been studied collectively and together, so that's the difference that Aclú will also make. We were producing research outcomes on that. We align with the human rights approach, which is very much the approach of the HSE and very much the approach that I suppose our UNESCO chair is driven by human rights and sustainable development approaches. So making sure that the human rights of those with enduring mental illness are addressed in the treatment paradigms that they're involved with. If the other component of this is looking at evaluation, scaling, social return on investment, and outcomes contracting. So I mentioned at the start that we want to reshape the paradigm of care for mental health treatment. We won't be able to do that unless we can present the evidence. So saying that our intervention worked, people enjoyed it, they liked it, might not be enough to change the minds of policymakers, of investors, public or private, stakeholders who have the capacity to change the system. So built into our Aclú project is very much that human rights approach in education and training, and also an approach that will make sure that as we evaluate, the indicators that we use will be able to demonstrate the return on investment on this approach and how this approach can deliver better health outcomes at a more efficient level financially for the HSE or any other providers who are in that mix. And there's a little bit more about that financial model, which we'll come to later, but they're the main areas that we wanted to cover. So on to the next slide, Aisling. Aisling's in the States, so there's a little bit of delay in the changing of the slides. I mentioned it's SDG week. I'm not going to spend long on this slide. The key target of the SDGs that we're addressing with Aclú is target 3.4, reduce mortality from non-communicable diseases and promote mental health. So that's the key target. There are 17 SDGs, there are multiple targets, there are multiple principles. That's the key target we want to address. So improve the mental and physical health outcomes for people with enduring mental illness. And we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so we're on to Mairead. Mairead is going to speak to us about what has happened in the North Cork Rehabilitation and Recovery Team, much of which inspired us in this Aclú project. So without further ado, Mairead, I'd like to welcome you to the podium to discuss the work that you've done. Thank you.
So good afternoon. As Catherine mentioned, my name is Mairead Carolyn, and I suppose I'm a little bit of like a fish out of water today. I'm not an academic, I'm not a researcher. I'm a clinician who works day to day on the ground, providing services for people with severe and enduring mental illness. So I work in North Cork on the North Cork Rehabilitation and Recovery Team. So we're a small specialist team in a rural area in North Cork. We cover a population of about 90,000 people, and we work with primarily people we work with have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or severe bipolar disorder. And we know of people who present to mental health services, 10 to 14% of people will go on to develop these enduring illnesses that have very significant impact on their quality of life and their physical health. We know they will die earlier than their peers, their friends, their siblings. So there's an urgent need for interventions to improve outcomes. So as a team, next slide, please. So next slide. Okay. I'll go on while I wait for the slide. So in 2018, Dr. Susan Finnerty, who's the head of the Mental Health Commission, she's the Inspector of Mental Health Hospitals in Ireland. She did a survey looking at the level of provision for people with severe and enduring mental illness across Ireland. And that provision was found to be very seriously lacking in a number of areas. And Dr. Finnerty talked in her report about the need to focus on a specific type of recovery. And she talked about recovery for people with severe and enduring mental illness being about people experiencing and living with mental health challenges in their life and their personal goals they want to achieve regardless of the presence of ongoing mental health issues. And she said recovery should recognize their right to create a good life, to make a home, to engage in meaningful work or learning, and build good relationships with family, friends, people, and their community. So recovery is key to providing services for people with severe and enduring mental illness. This is a typical model, next slide, a typical model of recovery that was included in Dr. Finnerty's report. This is Frost's model from 2017. Now, the challenge for me and my team, the people I work with, is that is a wonderful model. But what do I do when I go to work on Monday? How do I ensure that the service I provide embeds opportunities for recovery for the people who attend our service? And that is a challenge for us as clinicians every day in what we do. So in 2018, as a group, as a team, we got together and we looked at how we can operationalize recovery. What does recovery look like on the ground? Are we providing services that actually promote recovery for the people attending our service? So next slide, please. And so we developed a 12-week intervention, which had a number of evidence-based components, which we provided for the people attending our service. And in that, we provided CBTP, so that's an evidence-based intervention, cognitive behavior therapy for psychosis. We provided resilience training. We provided an intensive OT FaceTime, focusing on nutrition, health, cooking, socialization. And the final afterthought we had was we did some exercise as well. So we included some exercise. Next slide, please. At the end of the 12 weeks, when we did a service evaluation and we asked the clients which component of these evidence-based interventions did they find most helpful, unanimously told us the walking component, so what they most valued. So we took that information and we developed an ongoing walking group, which we ran over 12 weeks. We introduced some very simple technology in the form of a pedometer. Most people with severe and enduring mental illness are excluded from the digital world, both because of poverty, knowledge, poor levels of access. So we introduced pedometers, and over the 12 weeks, the group went from an average step count of 1,000 to 6,000. So at the end of that intervention, we asked the people attending our service what would they like, and they said they wanted more access to exercise. That's what they wanted as part of their intervention. Now, normally, this is where the conversation stops. If you read a paper, read a book on recovery, it's at 12 weeks this happened. What's really been important for us as a team, that 4 years later, and now in 2022, despite COVID, we have 100% retention in our exercise group. All of the people who were in our original exercise group are now exercising vigorously twice a week. One time a week they attend a gym group, and the second time they attend a garden group. We've had 100% retention. And the service users tell us this is the most valuable intervention they've had in terms of their own recovery. And what we've observed is a real development in their social networks. One of the really devastating things to develop a severe enduring mental illness as an 18 or 19-year-old is the loss of your social network. Your friends go on to college, your friends go on to jobs, you're going in and out of hospital, you get left behind. And what we've most noticed as clinicians is that our group have really enriched social networks from being involved in the physical activities that have been developed. So that led us, I suppose, to ask the question, could we use technology? Could we use nutrition? Could we use exercise as one possible way to operationalize recovery for people with severe and enduring mental illnesses? And so we made contact with researchers in CIT, because MTU, because they have expertise in digital technology, they have expertise in nutrition, and they have expertise in physical activity. And so that conversation began, and this has brought us today to the development of Aclú. Thank you.
Thank you, Mairead. So I think that frames very nicely where the impetus for Aclú came from and why we are where we're at today. Okay, so despite continued technical problems, we can go on. We have a slide, Aisling, the next slide, which is very detailed. Hence, we printed it out and you have it on your seat. For those of you in the room here with me, for those of you online, you'll be able to see the on-screen slide, hopefully soon. There it is. It's not quite as complex as it looks. So it just takes our project, what you've heard of it so far, and puts it on one sheet in what we call a theory of change. So on the left, the blue part, you can see number 1 written there. That's where we want to start with this project. And I'm going to break this down in a minute in terms of its detail. But basically, there are a lot of steps and a lot of people involved in this project to get us to the end point that we want to get to. So this presents our theory of change. What's the problem? What do we need to do? Who needs to be involved? What activities have to take place in order for us to impact the system change, the changes to people's treatment paradigm, and everything that we mentioned so far. So we've tried to summarize this in our theory of change document, which was originally a different color, but I tried to theme it yesterday to the Aclú colors. Anyway, hopefully, I think it worked better on the page than it did on screen. But anyhow, you get the picture. So that gets broken down in the next few slides. I'll take you through part of it and Tara is going to join in. So first we look at what the focal problem is. So the focal problem here is the nature of enduring mental illness. The associated medication can lead to social isolation, poverty, stigma, and exclusion. So this, is written in the literature. It's in lots of, we know this for this population group. There's little attention on preventative approaches that translate physical health interventions into routine clinical practice. So Mairead mentioned her work, and that was very much, I suppose, a pilot in some respects. So it's not routine clinical practice. What we want to do is make this part and parcel of what everyone who experiences enduring mental illness receives as part of their treatment paradigm. And then those living with enduring mental illness have a greatly reduced life expectancy compared with others. Mairead mentioned that as well. And it's up to 20 years reduced life expectancy compared to the rest of the population. So you are talking about a particularly affected group. The target audience for Aclú is those living with enduring mental illness in residential and community care. So they are very much the people who are our key stakeholders who this project needs to serve. And the project is not about just producing academic outputs. It's about serving this population group and transforming the services that they receive to improve health outcomes for them. Stakeholders are the MTU team, the HSE enduring mental illness team, those with EMI in enduring mental illness in our communities, the external advisory board, any funders that may come on board. So we have some representatives, as Tara pointed out earlier, from a peer support network in Kerry and an early intervention group in Cork, who can also talk to the needs of those with enduring mental illness in our group. So on to the next slide. Tara, I think you're going to take this. Nope. Okay, so some of the assumptions around what we're going to do in the Aclú project is that we're going to deliver research excellence. So we have been engaging in a lot of research, rapid reviews, call for materials from people. What we did find on this project is that a lot of what is in academic research doesn't necessarily reflect some of the practices that are happening on the ground, and neither do they inform what we want to see happening on the ground. So there's a gap between what's been published in research and what's needed to make a change. So our research is aiming to kind of try and bridge that gap. We're building in more grey literature researches, searching every project that people might have engaged with for a short period of time, but they haven't published in a research journal. There's lots of initiatives that have taken place, just like Mairead described, and reports coming back from people living with enduring mental illness that attest to the fact that this solution works. And what we're trying to do is gather those through our grey literature search and compile them and put them together so as others can see what works. Effective partnerships are critical, not just the partners that we mentioned already, but other partners who have contacted us from other parts of the globe with experiences about their interventions and what has happened as part of them. We want to give micro projects some support, test the projects in live sites in Cork, in Kerry at the moment, and then we will put our time and expertise into these and hopefully communicate well among each other. As Tara said earlier, we've been communicating a lot as a group, communicate more broadly as well to make sure that we deliver good results. The next slide, Aisling. So we need lots of research, interventions, evaluation, especially looking at this social return on investment for this type of activity, people's time, enduring mental illness, stakeholder interest, and finance. So they're just some of the activities and inputs that we need to do. Tara, no? No, okay, right. I'll fire ahead. Okay, so what do we need to do? Build excellence in enduring mental illness in MTU research and activity. So multidisciplinary cross-campus research on EMI and deliver locally, regional and internationally relevant solutions. One of the things we want to do here is change how education is delivered in MTU in relation to enduring mental illness. So one of the entire purposes of the project was to change and shape how our graduates emerge from this university to address enduring mental illness in their professional careers. So whether they're coming through as a mental health nurse, as a physical activity specialist, as a physical education specialist or teacher, whatever career path that enduring mental illness is covered in, we're embedding new paradigms of care, new knowledge into those programs to ensure that those graduates will address the human rights and sustainable development agenda that Aclú aims to touch upon. And we've conducted an audit of all the courses and programs that operate currently in MTU, where we could slot this new paradigm into, so as our graduates emerge equipped with a different skill set, different competencies, and different knowledge about the needs of this population group. Okay, yeah, so better research and better outcomes. So what we want to deliver is solutions. No, you're fine, Aisling, you can go to the next slide. The final step of our pathway is Aclú delivers solutions aligned with enduring mental illness global priorities to improve health outcomes and empower recovery in enduring mental illness. So you have that little theory of change on a slide there. That's it in a nutshell. And we can go on to the next slide, Aisling. UFIT. So there are a few different components we mentioned before. So we've got the physical activity, we've got nutrition, we've got digital, we've got our human rights piece and our social return investment evaluation piece. So the first one is UFIT. So this kind of represents where we're going with our physical activity piece. So physical activity is an important part. Mairead mentioned in the pilots that have been run. And we have a program called UFIT that has been kind of embracing physical activity in various different services and health and fitness clubs around the world. We're modifying or developing a component of UFIT that specifically targets enduring mental illness. And in doing that, it's totally aligned with the WHO guidelines on physical activity and sedentary behavior that were released in 2020. And both myself and Joe we're lucky to have worked on that particular project in developing those guidelines. And we're going to build in some specific supports for those with enduring mental illness and those working with those with enduring mental illness around prescribing, designing exercise programs with that population group, and hence our rapid review. So that's our community-based approach with UFIT. And on to the next slide, Aisling. Tara, now, okay, right, there's nothing on this screen. No, sorry, you can stand here.
Okay, thank you, Catherine, for that. So I'm just going to give you an insight into the nutrition and enduring mental illness information that we know. What do we know? Not much, unfortunately. There have been very few studies undertaken on nutrition and those living with enduring mental illness. And there have been no interventions that have combined nutrition, physical activity, and digital technology to help support people living with enduring mental illness. There has been some research looking at food and food compounds. So things such as fermented foods, omega-3s, and diets that are low in saturated fats and refined sugars. And they've been found to modulate the development of several mental disorders, but the exact complexity of how that works is still unknown. So it's an emerging area. Of the research that has been done with those individuals that live with enduring mental illness, there's been a lot of interest in supplementation. So what they found is individuals that supplement with micronutrients over a long period of time, their symptoms, alongside taking their medication, I have to say, so it's in collaboration with their medication, they found that their symptoms can be alleviated somewhat. But the interesting finding is This was done in 16,000 participants in America. The interesting finding was it had to be long term. So it was those that were supplementing with micronutrients for at least 15 months. The best benefits were found in those who were supplementing for at least 24 months. And again, this is an emerging area. What we do therefore need to know, what we do know is that we need to bridge this knowledge gap. We need to open up the discussion. We need to include nutrition in interventions. We must advocate that in policy, because what we also do know is individuals that are undergoing their standard treatment of care through medication, if they begin that process with a nutrient deficiency, their actual therapy is not as effective. So even from the outset, if they have a nutrient deficiency, which many of them in qualitative reviews and discussions and talking with Mairead, many of them do. Many of them are overweight. Many of them have other conditions going on, metabolic syndrome, diabetes. They all have potential to have nutrient deficiencies. And if they're already taking medication or starting a medication process and they have a nutrient deficiency, evidence is out there to say that that therapy isn't going to be as effective as if they had a healthy diet and they had nutrients, sufficient amounts of nutrients that they were consuming. But again, this is such a huge area. We are really interested in the digital possibilities of how that could benefit those individuals living with enduring mental illness. A lot of them talk about in the qualitative research that we have looked into, because there isn't a lot of nutrition studies that are out there that are published. Obviously, I'm talking to Mairead and getting feedback that way. Lots of them are very concerned about their weight. So therefore, that's maybe the in or the link that we may have with getting them to consider healthier diets. But it's going to be a challenge. So the digital possibilities there are huge. When we talk about digital possibilities, this is where Susan comes in with the expertise here, but we're talking about, are we saying one-on-one consultations, emails? Are we talking about chatbots, smartphone apps? The world is our oyster. But the most important thing that we do is we use those individuals who are living with enduring mental illness to help us design this. We're not just going to throw these ideas out there. We're going to talk to them. We're going to co-develop this intervention with them. And we want to make sure that their user needs are actually what is at the front of what we're trying to do. Next slide. Oh, thank you. So digital healthcare. What we do know with digital healthcare is that there are already out there a large range of health services that support the mental health and well-being of individuals. But these service users that use those services within the HSE have very diverse needs. But what they're traditionally used to is face-to-face interaction. So what we know with digital technology is that these can support these services, either through standalone solutions or with existing service offering. And what digital technology can do, it can offer flexibility. It can deliver interventions in a natural context. It can also reach larger populations and in a cost-effective way. So this is where Aclú comes in. This is where we see this huge opportunity to offer this integrated approach. So we've got physical activity, nutrition, and digital technology. And what Aclú wants to do is evaluate the role of digital technology in supporting people with enduring mental illness, to try and get them to stop being so sedentary, to trying to get them to maintain their physical activity, or simply start a physical activity or increase their physical activity and adopt a healthier diet in doing so. But how we do that is we need to identify what types and uses of digital technology are most suitable for these different user needs. And that is where the co-design process will come in. We will use the service users to help us do this. And that's where the really exciting components of what we're trying to do with Aclú will develop. Thank you.
Okay, so the next component of Aclú is the human rights-based approach. And Sarah, who's standing at the back, has been very instrumental in designing a human rights-based module that will be integrated into training for people who are embracing the Aclú approach. And I mentioned that earlier on in terms of our program. So this will be an online course for service providers and higher education staff. So this is the course we'll embed into the training here if people want to bring it forward, or people who are already working in the community who know that the HSE policy is around human rights-based education, but they're maybe not familiar with what that looks like, and definitely what that looks like in a physical activity intervention. So this module will be tailor-made to enable them to understand how they adopt this and embrace this in their practical work in the community all the time. So it will give them the who, what, when, and what impact, etc. 3 modules: introduction to human rights and enduring mental illness, and bringing it all together. So they're the components that are covered in that module. And again, we'll be testing this, sharing it with service users, sharing it with those working in the field to test that this is acceptable, workable, makes sense to people. But Sarah has fantastic experience in this domain, and a huge amount of work has been done, and this module is nearly ready to, it's ready and out there for feedback. So we've made great progress on this in the last number of months. Next slide, please, Aisling. Okay, so the next component, the last component, is evaluation and scaling. I talked about this a little bit earlier, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but just to say that, yeah, so obviously our UNESCO chair works closely with UNESCO, and UNESCO have been working very closely with UEFA on a model that UEFA developed to gather information about social return on investment in physical activity and sport. The model is called GROW, and it's been modified and adapted for different contexts, different types of activities. So one of our external advisory board members, Pamela Wicker, is on the steering committee of GROW with UEFA, and has been very much, is an econometrician who's very much involved in looking at this econometrics, the social return investment component, and we're going to apply this to the Aclú project. So that will influence the data and indicators that we gather when we're applying the project, which is physical activity, nutrition, digital. We look at our metrics, apply these indicators, and we will look at novel financial instruments, whether or not they will work. This has been looked at a lot in sport. Sometimes governments invest quite a bit in sport. Maybe they don't invest as much as people would like. So the way in which this investment goes is, look, if there's an appetite for private investors or for an organization to invest in certain outcomes being attained, then a purchaser will, pay for those. So there's kind of 3 people in it, maybe a government, maybe a private investor, a government agency, a private investor, and then a service provider who's providing the physical activity and interventions. And so that's a kind of a novel financial instrument that we're going to look at. But ultimately, we want to know what is the return on investment of the Aclú approach and what outcomes, social, health, political, educational, come with that. So that kind of captures in a nutshell what our monitoring framework will look like, and we're keeping an eye on that in the design of the project as well. That'll very much influence the sustainability of the project into the long term, and hopefully the system change that we mentioned that we're trying to achieve. On to the next slide, Aisling. Now, so Tara mentioned already, we're very thankful today to IEER for providing the funding for today's event. So without further ado, I'm going to call on Breda O'Dwyer, who will take us through what IEER is all about and how it applies to Aclú.
Great. Thank you very much, and I won't delay you because I know you all want to get to hear the depth of the keynotes of today. I suppose essentially IER is part of a group which is the EER brand, which is the European Entrepreneurial Regions, which was developed by Europe back in 2010, and the first awards were given in 2011. And we were delighted that Kerry was one of those first regions to be given the status of EER status, which is really, really symbolic because it's not just about, which is quite often seen as being the default button of being entrepreneurial, i.e. enterprise. Being entrepreneurial is fundamentally leading to change with impact. And that's what Aclú is about as well. So it makes perfect sense to be associated with that particular project, as well as being on the steering committee from seed. But I guess having been a designated EER status, a number of us got together back in 2016, and of the regions from Finland, from Germany, from Poland, from Romania, and Spain and Italy. And we looked at how we could develop the whole area of what they refer to as young entrepreneurship, where young was defined as between 18 and 40. So it gave a whole new meaning to that range. Nonetheless, we then said, okay, we learned a lot from each other and how we could develop ourselves entrepreneurially. And we said, okay, here we are in COVID, in unprecedented times, I guess, and how could we, as regions, given the status, see to be entrepreneurial? So we got together again and we said, how do we survive post-COVID? And we were at the closing event, and I was joined last week by my colleague, Sarah Flaherty, who's with us here today, the External Services Manager here within GU and Kerry, and our colleague as well, Ben Slim, who's working on the project. And what we realized, we did produce a number of findings. I won't go through those with you. And we also made a number of recommendations to the EU. 2 key things. First and foremost, what we realized was that despite the pandemic, our region survived really, really well. And we survived really, really well thanks to digitalization. And through digitalization, we found that those companies that were very much driven digitally grew, and those that were digitally enabled grew. That was fantastic to find out. Yet, what we also, on the flip side of that, realized was that remote working was very much welcomed, and it was wonderful, and it created opportunities of sustainability and keep going, etc. However, isolation was setting in, lack of socialization was setting in, and we began to see a lot more attention being given to the area of mental wellness, which in its own frame was beginning to see an issue for talent retention and talent acquisition in the regions. So from an impact perspective, from a long-term sustainability, this was becoming an issue. So with that in mind, and given the fact that as part of this project, we had to present action plans, it was brought forward as an action plan for the Kerry region, where we decided we would, as the leading partner within the ER group, tackle the issue. So from that perspective, we decided that we would dedicate the part of the project from expertise to this event. And we're delighted that we're in a position to be able to hear from the experts, to learn from the experts, and fundamentally provide input that will create opportunities for solutions digitally and otherwise, fundamentally lead through change and be entrepreneurial. Thank you.
Thank you, Breda. Great context there for how IER connects with Aclú project. Okay, so Tara, I'm going to call on you to introduce Kelly, our keynote, if you would like to. Okay, all right, fair enough. Kelly, I think everyone's ready to hear what you have to say and delighted to listen. Now, from a technical point of view, there is nothing appearing on this screen here in front of me. I'm not sure why, but perhaps we should switch to the screen over to my right, which is actually visible, if at all possible. Might be a little bit difficult for you to see your slides. We'll get it sorted. Okay, so we're very delighted that Kelly has joined us from Dartmouth in the US, and Kelly has as well a huge amount of practical experience. So we were very much looking in our search for who to ask to join our external advisory group and who to ask to come and speak today, and who has really good messaging to give to you and to everybody online. And Kelly very much hit all the metrics that we had in relation to this. So one of our key things was we wanted pracademics, as they're called, people who, maybe come from an academic background or who have been engaged in research and publications, but who have been involved in practical initiatives on the ground, where they live, in their communities, in other communities, and who integrate that into their day-to-day work. And Kelly has some fantastic stories to tell us about the work that she has been engaged in and the impact that it has on people in enduring mental illness in her area. So Kelly, I'm going to pass over to you. I know you can see it there, but I don't know if there's enough. Look, do you know what? This mic works, and I think, to be fair, it might be easier for you to use this screen because that's blank. Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be here today and get to share our work with you. And thank you to Tara and Catherine and Sarah for being so welcoming. And it's just really exciting to be here with you today. And I also want to mention in my introduction that I am a co-director of a new implementation science center at Dartmouth. And the field of implementation science is all about how do we address the research to practice gap across health conditions or health issues. And so all of our work is taking evidence and working with people in real world health settings to translate that evidence. And today I'm going to be sharing a study with you that was funded by our National Institutes of Health. It was my first large trial focused on supporting young adults with enduring mental illness and supporting their health. So the next slide, please. So, and in all the wonderful talks or people who've come up here before and shared their experience and expertise, it's all great. It's going to build a nice foundation for what I'm going to be talking about too. And we know that we know that studies that have shown that lifestyle programs that provide support for physical activity, maybe not nutrition, but certainly healthier diets, can improve the health of people with enduring mental illness. through weight loss and improving fitness, even among people taking antipsychotic medications. So numerous studies have shown that people can still benefit from these programs. And in the US, these programs are becoming widely implemented in our community mental health system, which is our publicly funded mental health system. And so we're moving to the point from having these evidence-based interventions to actually working to get them implemented. And there's a method and systematic way of thinking about even doing that as a science, the implementation work. But unfortunately, if you look at these studies of lifestyle interventions for people with enduring mental illness or serious mental illness, you'll see that the average age of most people who enroll in those studies is age 50. So if we're interested in addressing health and preventing these long-term mental physical health problems that this group has, we have to think about how do we intervene earlier when people are younger and help them provide opportunities to these types of interventions. So next slide. And so fortunately, there is some literature from the general population where researchers have asked young people, what do you want from a lifestyle or weight loss intervention? And so these are people who are in the general population, maybe have a mental illness, maybe don't. And people have taught, young people have taught, and young people has been defined between the ages of 18 to 25 or 18 to 35 or 18 to 40 in some instances. But when young people talk about weight loss or lifestyle interventions, they talk about maybe not weight loss is the central motivation, even though that may be of interest to them, but really also thinking about self-improvement and fitness, like and things like wanting a briefer, more low intensity, maybe a hybrid program where they're going to some sessions in person and maybe part of it online, and really wanting to make sure these programs emphasize their autonomy and their choice. So it's about what they want to do. They're getting support or coaching, but how do you help support that? And then when we researchers have compared the preferences of younger people and older people who are have been through a weight loss experience, the younger people talk about interest in their appearance and social motivations for weight loss. That health issues are just, they're not experiencing necessarily those health issues yet. So they're far in the future. They're more interested in what you would imagine a young person's interested in. And then small qualitative studies have asked people who have first episode psychosis what they're interested in, and they talk about the link between understanding there's a link between their physical health and their mental health. They want to experience improved self-esteem through losing weight. Maybe they've gained weight being on some of these medications and they're aware of it, and they want to lose weight to feel better. And so in the next slide, I'll show you a picture of our team. So this is our team that was funded by the National Institutes of Health that included 4 of our community mental health centers and some young people who were experiencing enduring mental illness and a number of different investigators. And so we took on this challenge of how do you design a lifestyle intervention for people, young people with enduring mental illness that would be appealing to them and they might benefit from. So the next slide, what we did in our trial called the Fit Forward trial is recruited 150 young adults from 4 community mental health centers who had a body mass index of 25 or higher, so they were considered overweight, and some had obesity, and we randomized them to either a program that was group-based. So some of the things that were mentioned earlier, the idea that young people might want to be with other young people who are going through the similar experience and get a chance to get together and focus on their weight loss and fitness goals. And that was enhanced with popular technologies I'll tell you about in a minute. And we compared that group-based intervention to something that was one-on-one coaching, and it was almost entirely done remotely. So the intervention that we actually hypothesized was going to have a stronger effect was our Peer Fit lifestyle intervention. So this was group-based. Participants met for twice-weekly sessions led by a personal fitness trainer, and they were done in their community mental health centers, place where they were getting their mental health services care. And those sessions were enhanced by a Fitbit, so a wearable technology for self-monitoring. So we didn't collect the data from the Fitbit. It wasn't for us. It was for them to use a way to self-track and look at their fitness or their increasing their steps, however they wanted to use it. And then we had a private Facebook group that brought the group that was moderated by the coach, so participants can engage and enjoy each other with each other outside of the group sessions. And then that was enhanced with supported text messages from their coach. On the next slide, a little bit more about PeerFit. It was informed by principles from our diabetes prevention program, guided by social learning theory, where the idea is you're learning from other people in your group, and then you get a chance to experience some health behavior change in a supported setting with your coach. You can try it, see how it goes, try it again, try something different. And the peer-to-peer support was with each other. So the peers were other people in your group who were going through this health behavior change experience. So in the next slide, so this was really important. When we thought about digital health, there are lots of ways you could do this. You could use an app that's an app. You could develop an app. You could design something new for people who are in your study. And we just wanted to use popular technology. And we thought, well, why not use the things that young people at that time were using in their daily life and capitalize on those. So instead of trying to integrate something new that people have to incorporate in their daily life, use the technology they're already doing and see how we could leverage that to support health behavior change. And so participants had the wearable device, the Fitbit, and then they received text message reminders from their coach and this private Facebook group. So on the next page, I'm just going to show you an example of what a text message would look like. And so the coaches gave them participants 3 to 5 times per week. In PeerFit, they were for reminders, encouragement, and motivation. And so they checked in. Mainly it was reminders about class, that the class would meet. People just appreciated, or I think the reminder was also an encouragement that we're meeting this week, but also they interacted with them around their physical activity and encouraged them to be more active. And in the next slide, so that was our experimental condition, the one that we thought was going to be most effective. And so we compared that condition to something that wasn't group-based and something that was remote, where people weren't coming together. And that was our BEAT lifestyle intervention. So that was basic education supported by activity tracking. And so BEAT involved coming once in person to meet your coach, to have an orientation session. The coach would tell you about what was going to happen in BEAT. You get face-to-face time, but every other meeting after that was remote. So it was a once monthly telephone coaching session, and we wrote a curriculum for the coaches to use to walk participants through those coaching sessions. And then it was the text messaging. And the text messaging in BEAT had more of it. It wasn't just physical activity. It had an emphasis on healthier eating, not necessarily nutrition, because the BEAT was delivered by non-clinical people at the mental health. It was delivered by case managers. So people who were used to working also with young people in the rest of their life, not necessarily focused on just their mental health symptoms. So in the next slide, a little bit more about BEAT. So when we talk about healthier eating, some of the concepts that we used in BEAT were pretty simple thinking about, but things that people still appreciated support for. So thinking about how do you increase eating fruits and vegetables, how do you reduce sugar sweetened beverages, thinking about your junk food intake, and then really focus on substitution. So eating more of this and less of that, including increasing lean proteins people were eating. So we took a broad public health approach because we wanted case managers to feel comfortable talking about healthy eating without feeling like they needed nutrition expertise, which just isn't scalable, at least at that time in the settings that we're working in. And then daily physical activity of any kind. So being active, however suits you. Next, in the next slide, and this is some data where the most important thing for us to understand this slide is it's asking, well, did participants experience a significant change over time in terms of significant weight loss and significant improvements in fitness? And the answer is yes. Over time, it's measured at 6 months and measured at 12 months. So in the next slide, one of the outcomes that we were really excited about, especially because this was a secondary focus, the NIH wouldn't fund us to look at weight gain prevention. They wanted us to look at weight loss, but we measured it anyway, even when we weren't funded to do it. And it was very exciting, this finding that over 50% of participants, so you can see at 6 and 12 months in both groups, didn't gain any weight. So they were either at or below their baseline weight, which is so important for young people, of whether you have an enduring mental illness or not, because young adulthood is actually the time in our lives where we gain, on average, the most weight we'll ever gain because of all types of things. You're living away from home, maybe you're preparing your own meals for the first time, and you're not, you're eating what you want, you're at college, there's all types of reasons why, or you're taking an antipsychotic medication that may increase your weight gain. So, and then here's some quotes from our participants, and I took these are quotes. I wanted to show you both PeerFit and BEAT quotes that represent people's experiences. And you can see in the blue, the dark blue, those are BEAT quotes from BEAT participants. And one participant said, you know, because I have so many appointments and I have so much daily stuff, plus a son, I didn't have time to go to groups and all that. So doing this, she was in the remote coaching group. It was much easier, where I knew I'd be able to participate and still text and do all that and still take care of my son and then still be able to talk to you guys. And another BEAT participant said it was really easy. I liked having the Fitbit and keeping track of the steps and getting the most motivational text messages. It really didn't interfere too much with my normal life, which was nice. It was beneficial because it made me more aware of what I was doing every day as far as activity. And then when we talked to some participants who were in the PeerFit group, and these were both people who felt like they benefited from that group-based intervention. One participant said, since I put all the weight on due to problems that I've had in my life after grieving the loss of my parent, my goal was to lose weight. And this is the only thing that worked, was consistently going to a class and participating and being part of that community. They lost about 22 pounds in the program. And another participant said, it's not just fit and getting healthy, it's socializing, getting to know people in the same boat, and just very supportive and non-judgmental type of environment. You're getting more than just exercise and fitness out of it. So in the next slide, but okay, it's like, well, there was no difference. The other thing I should mention is there was significant change over time, but no difference between groups. So people in both groups benefited. But when you look at, well, okay, but did they attend? What was attendance like? You'll see it was not great in the group-based, it just wasn't great in the group-based intervention. The mean was around 6 out of 24 sessions attended, 5 out of 24. And then we looked at, okay, well, we understand it can be, we heard it's just very challenging for people to consistently come to a group session in the centers where we worked. And we said, well, what percent attended at least the first one? You know, is it they came to the first one and then dropped off? And you'll see in the PeerFit group-based, it was about 70% attended a lifestyle session, 75% attended exercise. But when you compare that to the BEAT, which was remote coaching, 97%, almost all of them came to at least the first session. And then they attended 4 out of 6 of the lifestyle coaching sessions. So it gives us some insight into session attendance, and session attendance was correlated with weight loss in the BEAT intervention, not in PeerFit. So you also want to ask, okay, they're coming, but does that correlate with the outcomes you're looking at? So in the next slide, to summarize these results, the peer group intervention we thought would be more superior than the BEAT, which was pretty light touch. It was not in achieving clinically significant weight loss or fitness. Both interventions significantly improved outcomes, and importantly, weight gain was prevented in over half of participants over a 1-year period. And engagement was a challenge for the in-person group intervention, but it was not for the mobile health coaching. And then the next slide, some of the things we learned about implementation that are really important for the next phase of carrying this type of work together was important to address in our community mental health centers, the leadership and staff perceptions about things like weight loss. So we heard even from psychiatrist team meetings that they would say, well, our participants aren't interested in weight loss. That's, young adults they don't care about. That's not something I want to talk about or think about. That there could be a negative impact. So another concern was, look, if you introduce this health coaching on top of their mental health care, they just might get really unstable and have problems. And, we just don't want to introduce anything new while they're receiving mental health care, which we didn't have, I think, any people in our study with adverse mental health problems that were triggered through having these coaching experience. And that there's people, just young people, they don't have access to popular technology. And we'd say, well, have you asked them? Have you talked to them about what they're using? Have you talked about them if they're using smartphones or if they're online? How do you know they don't have access? And so I think those are some things to think about. And the data supports now that shows that lots of people who are living with enduring mental illness have access to technology and use it regularly. But we still need to think about, also need to design interventions for integrated with mental health and health services. So this was a study, it was layered on top of what routine care is provided. And so we are thinking of that next step of how do you get something that's, especially now we have some evidence behind it, actually really integrated and paid for and into the workflow of the providers we work with. And one way to do that might be coupling it with their psychiatric medication management. So maybe BEAT is part of offered as part of your medication management treatment. Maybe it's integrated into primary care services. So the primary physical health care services, they're often co-located in our community mental health center through grants in the US. So maybe that's an avenue. And then also back to this thinking about the clinical skills. You're going to take time away from a psychologist to do this, or could you use a case manager or someone else with non-clinical skills that can be trained in providing support for physical activity and healthier eating or nutrition? Okay, so key takeaways were thinking about these light touch remote coaching interventions that could be delivered by non-clinical staff, and thinking about their can have impact, and learning that participants really like flexibility and receiving support on their own terms and at a convenience, so they can ignore a text message. No one was expecting them to reply, if at all, but especially not in that moment. They can reply when they're ready if they want, and thinking about how it works for them. And then the nutritional messaging that focus on maybe substitution. So big picture, unless you have the ability to provide really one-on-one high-level nutritional counseling, that's one avenue, but we don't. And so we have to think about these larger messages that will help people make changes that are going to improve their health. And then finally, the researcher community partners. So we're always partnering. All the work we do is partnered. It's never alone as a researcher. We have to work together, especially to think about some of the challenges that I mentioned from the beginning, and how do you take those on before you try to implement a new service, and identify new opportunities for successfully implementing programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, for that insight into the program that you ran. Now, we are running a little bit over time, and I'm thinking maybe people... That's exactly what I was going to say. Fair choose, Joe, you read my mind. Okay, I think everyone needs to stand up, get a cup of coffee, cup of tea. Our musicians who you may have heard on your way in playing some very nice traditional Irish music. Hopefully those of you online will be able to hear this time now. Kieran and Colette, thank you very much. So we'll have some music, we'll have tea, coffee, there's herbal tea there, and just some light snacks. And we'll see you back here in 25 minutes. Thank you to our musicians, Kieran and Colette. Very nice to hear the traditional Irish music at play. I think it really sets a lovely backdrop and context to our Aclú project. Okay, so thank you to all of us who are online. I hope you managed to have a cup of tea, cup of coffee, cup of water, stretch the legs, whatever else, and to those of you who are still in the room. Just a reminder, our event is being recorded and the recording is being shared, and we are aware of a number of people who are going to check back in on the recording as opposed to join today, so that's great. So we're on to our next speaker. Dr. Joseph Firth, who joins us from Manchester. And Joseph, as I mentioned earlier, Joseph and I had the pleasure of being involved in the WHO guidelines development process in 2020 and the outcomes of that. So Joseph has been very involved in physical activity, very involved in enduring mental illness as a specialist area, and is a research fellow now in the UK around digital and physical activity. I'm not going to take up any more of his time. He's got a great story to tell. So Joseph, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming along. I think we have the clicking working as well now, yeah, which is excellent. Thanks for inviting me, Catherine, and thanks to all the organisers for putting together such a fantastic event. It's a real pleasure to be here for an exciting new initiative of really taking the research into action. So I'm going to be talking about our work on digital lifestyle interventions in mental health care. And I'll start by just talking a little bit about the evidence that we've produced in this field and the evidence underpinning these approaches, and then a little bit about the more practical side of the initiatives we're kicking off now over in Manchester in the UK. And I'll apologise in advance for my outrageous Yorkshire accent. If you can't understand a word of what I'm saying, feel free to email me because I can type a lot better than I talk. So, okay, so the idea of the healthy body and healthy mind is something which is as old as medicine itself. Here's a quote from Hippocrates talking about how we can use nourishment and exercise to improve overall health. And then we have, oh, wait a minute, I have to admit somebody. Oh, there we go. Albert Einstein didn't say much on the matter, but as you can see from his photographs, he was also a big believer in this philosophy. But it's something that's really not had much uptake, even though the general population are all aware of this connection. It's not had much uptake, unfortunately, in mainstream psychiatry, but this is starting to change now, and there's a real interest among psychiatrists on how we can use lifestyle medicine and physical health in order to improve mental health outcomes. And our group, a couple of years ago, were asked to bring together all the top tier evidence on the topic of using lifestyle medicine in mental health. So basically, along with a bunch of researchers, we brought together all the data from meta-analyses of prospective cohort studies, Mendelian randomization studies, which are basically population scale genetic studies, which can tease out the causal factors between exposure and an outcome, existing meta-reviews on this subject, and meta-analyses of RCTs to look at how lifestyle factors can actually influence a range of different mental health conditions. And here's the main figure. Now, the full report is available online. It's about 8,000 words and it'll bore you to death. But this figure is pretty good because it shows the strength of the lines and the thickness of the lines basically reflects the convergence of evidence for each of these different lifestyle factors that we have on different areas of mental health. So as you can see, for instance, with sleep, we know that's very well connected to a whole range of different mental health conditions. But the sleep one is quite complicated because actually, the more you look at the data, the relationship is quite bidirectional. And this is reflected in the data, but also in everybody's everyday experiences, really. We all know how if you're sleeping bad, it's going to have an impact on your mood the next day, whether you've got a mental illness or not. And then vice versa, if you're struggling with your mental health or anxiety or stress, that can have an impact on your sleeping patterns as well. But still an important lifestyle factor in causing and in causing mental health conditions. It precipitates the development of mental health, and also treating people with mental illness. It's important to take sleep into account as it can improve outcomes. Diet, as Tara spoke a little bit about earlier, the evidence is really just emerging for diet. There's some clinical studies in ADHD and depression showing significant effects from dietary interventions and prospective links over time. But as we mentioned earlier, not very many studies looking at how we can use dietary approaches to improve mental health outcomes in people living with severe and enduring mental illnesses like bipolar disorder or psychosis. But there is a whole new body of evidence that we've reviewed separately, looking at the theoretical links, and there's more and more evidence for these biological pathways through which good quality diet can actually influence all different aspects of mental health, from our brain health and cognition to our stress and even potentially the risk of actual mental illness. But then separately to this emerging body of quite exciting evidence that's getting a lot of attention, there's a much more obvious link, which is very well established on how diet can influence mental health, because we already know diet influences our physical health, and poor diet can put people at risk of diabetes and cardiometabolic diseases. That's very well established. And it's also very well established that metabolic diseases put people at higher risk of poor mental health. So we have this important indirect pathway that's very well established. For smoking, smoking's quite an interesting one because we've known for a long time that tobacco use is very highly elevated among mental health populations. But now there's this new body of evidence emerging from the genetic studies on how smoking itself may actually increase people's risk causally of developing a mental illness in the first place. And this applies to common mental health conditions like depression, but then also more even severe conditions like schizophrenia. And there's data from these Mendelian randomization studies showing how tobacco is causally linked with the onset of these. And then also in people living with these conditions, continuing to smoke obviously is really strongly related with the premature mortality we see in these populations, and even the mental health outcomes and chances of recovery. But the good news is from this new Cochrane review by Gemma Taylor over in Bristol, I think it is, they put together this fantastic review looking at how helping people to quit smoking can actually have such a positive impact on mental health, with significant improvements in anxiety, depression, stress, positive feeling. Every mental health outcome really examined in this review was significantly associated with smoking cessation in a positive way, which kind of dispels the myth that is sometimes still prevalent in psychiatric services around smoking being kind of acceptable or even like good for people's mental health and not to discourage smoking. It's getting more popular now, smoking cessation, fortunately. But for a long time, there was an understanding it was like a way of relief, for instance. But actually, all the data shows that helping people to quit is going to have a long-term benefit on people's, obviously, physical health, but also the mental health. Now, finally, physical activity, which is my main area of interest and also happens to have the strongest and most established links so far with the different mental health conditions we examined in this review, from ADHD in young people to long-term conditions like schizophrenia. We can see positive protective effects for certain conditions from people being more active, as we found in this meta-analysis, where we brought together the data from comparing basically people who are physically inactive and do not achieve physical activity guidelines versus physically active members of the population. We brought together 49 independent studies from over 250,000 people, and the data really paints this very compelling picture of about a 15% risk reduction in the risk of developing depression across the population from just being more physically active. And what's really interesting is this applies across all the different age groups that we examined, be it teenagers or older adults or anything in between, across all the different continents and cultures that we looked at, a similar type of effect size for this protective effect of depression or protective effect of physical activity on depression. We did the same type of thing for anxiety, and again, similar results. There's less studies in that field, but from the emerging data that we have, a 15 to 20% risk reduction in anxiety from achieving sufficient levels of physical activity compared to being inactive. So that's it for the common mental health conditions, but can things like physical activity really help somebody who's living, with a very long-term, they've already developed a very long-term severe mental health condition like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder? And that's what we looked at for our EPA guidelines, the European Psychiatric Association guidelines on physical activity in the treatment of SMI. And again, we're using kind of like an aggregate data approach, bringing together the data from the clinical trials and long-term prospective studies. And the main outcomes that I'll just summarize very briefly here, that exercise is beneficial in major depressive disorders. People already receiving antidepressant treatment will see further benefits in terms of fitness, quality of life, and also clinical symptoms of depression from exercise interventions. And similar in psychosis, we can see, which is schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders like this, we can see significant improvements in fitness, which is very important for people's overall life functioning, cognition. Psychosis and schizophrenia are associated with deficits in cognition, poor memory, poor concentration, things like this, which sound quite clinical and scientific, but really impact on people's day-to-day life. And those cognitive deficits are not resolved by the medications whatsoever, sometimes worsened. So interventions which can reach those are very important. And also symptoms of psychosis reduced even in medicated patients by physical exercise interventions. And when we was looking at this evidence base, some interesting extra insights arose in terms of showing exercise is safe. There's a lot that, as we touched on earlier, I think maybe it was Kelly who spoke about this, is some fear among the mental health practitioners on starting new exercise interventions because of the safety aspects. But in the clinical trials, we see the same rates of adverse events in the control groups as the intervention groups. So it doesn't actually increase risk of anything. It's a safe intervention, and it works best in terms of adherence and effects when we get fitness professionals to deliver the interventions. And that's for a number of reasons, really, I think. You just see the information being received a lot better when it's coming from like a fitness person rather than a mental health clinician telling somebody to do fitness. Doesn't always get as well received by the patients as when we get the fitness guys to deliver the messaging. Even if it's the same messaging, that can have a big impact. So that's all the evidence in a very brief nutshell around using lifestyle medicine to prevent and treat mental health conditions. And in my opinion, it doesn't really matter any of that, because we need lifestyle medicine in these groups, regardless of the mental health effects, because people with mental illness are dying at much higher rates of physical health conditions than the general population. And this is something that's now recognized as a human rights issue. We see in the UK, we see around a 20-year gap in life expectancy. This got a headline article in the New York Times covering this massive health disparity. As I mentioned, in the UK, we can see the same trends. And what's scary about this massive health inequality is it's something worsening over time. It's not something that's improving as population health improves. It's a gap is getting bigger. People are dying at higher rates, and it's not of suicide, although some people do die of suicide in those groups, obviously. The thing driving the premature mortality and the early death is the physical health conditions. And it's not just something that impacts on people at the end of their life, it's something that impacts massively on people through the entire life course. And, you know, the development of really severe obesity and cardiometabolic diseases in the young people treated for these conditions is overlooked, and it just ruins people's quality of life if it doesn't get the attention that it deserves, along with ending their life sooner. So this was the basis for our recent Lancet Psychiatry Commission, which we've just recently recommenced, actually, where we brought together 42 different researchers from all over the world to try and look at the evidence base and provide some new solutions and recommendations on how to address these physical health disparities and help to protect physical health in people with mental illness. And that was really a core message, the importance of trying to use interventions to prevent these very foreseeable physical health conditions from arising, rather than the current approach seems to be waiting until people have a whole myriad of really terrible physical health conditions and then look at how we can treat it. It's so obvious that it's going to happen. We see it happen in the vast majority of patients. A more preventative approach is absolutely required. So again, full report online, very long, very lengthy, but we did produce this little infographic, which I can talk through very briefly, covering the key issues and our suggested actions across these different physical health conditions. So we talk about smoking, we talk about the medications that are used in these conditions, often necessary, but also have really terrible physical health side effects, which go unmonitored for a number of reasons, sometimes just due to clinical inefficiencies, sometimes due to people not really being able to stomach the physical health effects that these medications can have and having no answer to actually address it. And all these issues really are underpinned by this fragmented and inaccessible mental and physical health care. And there's not much integration yet of physical health into mental health care services, which is really at odds with the message I started off with about the healthy body, healthy mind stuff. Really well accepted in society, but the healthcare services are very clearly divided into mental health and physical health, and we need this overlap to actually bring these together. There's an inadequate health promotion, and that drives a lot of the poor metabolic outcomes that we see. So one of the core things we recommended from this commission was making use of digital technologies. The mental health services, they're aware of the problem, but they're massively under-resourced and they're underfunded, and they don't really have feasible methods for delivering health promotion at scale. So we can make use of digital technologies to hopefully address this gap and integrate physical health into mental health care. And that's a program of work we've just started on a 7-year UKRI grant that we're doing in the UK. We've been doing a number of different projects, but we've only just started recently, but I can spend a few minutes to talk you through some of the stuff we've been finding out so far. We've done a clinician's perspective exercise, basically surveys, and then also in-person qualitative interviews with a range of different clinicians, from the mental health nurses to the psychiatrists and the psychologists, mostly across the early intervention services for first episode psychosis, around their ideas and how they think these approaches could actually be feasibly implemented, how we could make use of digital technologies to improve the integration of physical health into the mental health care services. And we've got lots of really interesting feedback on how we could use it for like monitoring, or even recommending certain lifestyle changes and things like that. And also they've done well at identifying some of the core factors that get in the way of implementing these approaches. So a lot of it is similar to the insights that Kelly shared earlier around the patient-related factors. Not everybody has access to the right devices, and those who do have access to the devices don't always have data and things like that. So there's a little bit of a digital divide there, but that's reducing over time. Clinicians are very aware that's a problem that's kind of solving itself a little bit. Professional-related factors. The clinicians are kind of up for the idea of using digital tech to promote physical health in the services, but they're not really sure how to do it. A lot of them, the services are a little bit outdated in that sense. There's no training in digital health in the mental health care services. It's unclear, and they're aware that a lot of the apps or something, they're not really sure what would be good to recommend versus what would just be a useless, a sales tool basically. And then technology related factors. We have a lot of red tape around, just like the ethics of giving people a digital tool that's going to be collecting their data. And then if you can link that data with the NHS data and all these type of things can actually just scare people off, even though they think it could be beneficial. There's so much at the moment, people hold their hands up and just stand away. So we've got some key barriers, but some good suggestions from the clinicians on how to get over those, which we're looking at. I'll actually just skip the slide because we've covered that stuff anyway. We've also been doing a perspectives gathering exercise where we've done like an online perspective gathering thing with 500 young people across we've got past 500 now. This slide's a little bit out of date. 25 sites across the UK with some additions from UNSW in Australia, getting people's feedback really on the different types of behavioral health interventions we can deliver via apps, looking at health tracking, looking at health coaching, home workouts and like home coaching, more like video stuff. And then also using digital technologies to link people in with existing physical health stuff going off in their community. From this, we've really seen really positive feedback on the ideas of using health tracking and health coaching together. People like the idea of being able to see their own data, see how they're progressing, but then also get feedback from this, like as Kelly spoke about as well, as their work is already doing, linking people together, either with each other through peer support or to fitness or health professionals through digital technologies is going to be the key driving factor for really motivating people to stay engaged in these interventions. Because there's some really snazzy apps, and we've separately to this online perspective gathering exercise, we've been doing some just service user feedback stuff, not as a research project, but just giving people these technologies and getting feedback. And people really like the tech that's out there, like the Nike Fitness app and the Fitbit stuff, but ultimately people want that sense of connection to make them feel involved and engaged. So that's really reflected in our clinical interventions, which are ongoing. We've got the smoke-free study going off at the minute, which is like a smoking cessation app, which tracks your smoking cessation, but also includes these clinics and quit coaches, which one's a robot, but one's a real person. So anytime the patients can get access to an actual smoking cessation expert, who basically just, when people feel like they're going to relapse, they basically just provide them with a little bit of support, just have you had your NRT today? Have you thought about doing a distraction exercise? And this seems to be the thing that keeps people engaged with the digital tech, which then can hopefully result in long-term behavior change. But our clinical trials ongoing now on this in Manchester. Also has this fun little inner dragon game. People like the gamification aspects. You hatch your dragon when you quit smoking, and then he gets stronger and stronger, and you can do little distraction games with him to help you quit smoking and go through this journey together with your little pet dragon. We've tested out a lot of different exercise apps, and as I mentioned, people appreciate the technology but wanted to do something more in person. So instead, we're starting a clinical trial on basically home live Zoom video workouts delivered through the early intervention services. It's something we've trialed out with a few patients so far, and also you can see the video here where we trialed it out with our clinicians and researcher groups. This is Dina, our personal trainer, who's used to doing the exercise sessions in the context of severe mental illness, and now she's going to be bringing that to the early intervention for psychosis services through this study. It's kind of a little bit of a copycat from our colleagues over in the Netherlands, who ran a successful study during COVID where they had a live exercise intervention going and switched it online during the pandemic, and they found that actually worked really well to keep it online live via Zoom. So hopefully people will find this approach interesting. I'm going to have to wrap up now. But yeah, we're also giving people a Fitbit just to, as I said, integrate that health tracking, and we can give people feedback on their progress and stuff. So the whole idea of this program of research is that obviously young people with severe mental illness are at much higher risk of all these adverse health behaviours. We're going to be trying to help to use digital technologies to help people be more active. We're doing another study after this on eating and quitting smoking, with a real focus on actual integration and implementation. There's so many research projects that I've done in the past, the clinical trials we've done on exercise. As soon as you finish your trial, it goes really well, everybody loves it, and then literally nothing happens from the day you finish that 12-week trial, game over. So from now on, we're all focused on making sure we're doing things that can actually be sustainable in the long term in the clinical services. Digital technology presents a real opportunity for that. So around 1 minute over time, so we don't have any time for questions, but thank you.
Thank you, Joe. In terms of the questions, we will be having a breakout in a few minutes, well, after Evan's presentation. So I think we'll have time to have questions in that kind of forum at that stage. But thank you very much for that very comprehensive tour of all the initiatives that you've been involved with and the kind of status of the research to date, which is great. Integrating physical activity and the other components that we're looking at. And I think one component of that that we maybe didn't mention today yet is the outcome of the WHO guidelines, which was every move counts. So I think for this population group of those living with enduring mental illness, the message of every move counts is a really important one. It changes the previous message from the 2010 guidelines that was all about bouts of exercise that sometimes are overwhelming for someone who's starting on a journey. So really great to have the new assets, the new digital tech to support that engagement across the different areas, nutrition, smoking cessation, physical activity. But really for some, it's back to that every move counts and go from there, whether it's in person, online, whichever format. So that's great. Now we're going to go over to Evan, who's going to tell us about what he's been up to in the Southeast, which is very impressive work in line with the approach of Aclú. And we mentioned earlier that Kelly, Joe and Evan are all on the External Advisory Board. So we're delighted to have your expertise in that forum. So Evan, we're over to you. So you should be able to go straight on. Well, that was the 30-minute break you just had. So you're not having another one. Lock the doors. Dr. Evan Matthews, over to you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for the invite today as well to speak. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a great pleasure as well to share a stage with yourselves, with Joe and Kelly as well, who, working in this area, people that are leading the field in this area. So it's a real pleasure for me. That's sunny Waterford. It's always that sunny as well, even this morning. And that's where the Southeast Technological University is, formerly WIT, but now SETU. And I don't have any conflicts of interest to declare in this topic area, but I am a lecturer in physicivity and health behavior research in SETU. And I have various teaching and course leading responsibilities. And I'm also a researcher in this area around physicivity and what I call hard to reach populations. And of course, today's topic is around motor neuron and enduring mental illness. So just briefly, look, I don't need to explain to you the situation, particularly I'm focusing in on physical activity, but we don't have great global evidence. The best attempt to bring the evidence together, I know Joe was probably involved in that, is that meta-analysis going back as far as 2017, looking at physicivity levels, and no one is surprised to hear that physicivity levels among this population globally are quite low. Looking at the Irish population, and my talk will very much focus on the Irish context and the mental health services in Ireland. We tried to look at this issue as well, just to see where we are in an Irish context. Now, granted, it's self-report subjective-based measures of physicivity in this study of over more than 100 people in rehab and recovery services, so very much focused on populations with severe enduring mental illness. But we see, high levels of physical inactivity, of course, in this population. And this was mentioned earlier. I've forgotten to say his name. Pardon? Mairead, by Mairead. So high levels, you're talking over 70% not meeting the physicivity guidelines by a self-report. Now, it's actually probably underestimating the true extent of the issue. So we've done a little, and there is some research around objectively based measures of physicivity in this population. We tried to look at this as well, just to give context and put the context back, comparing it against the work of that meta-analysis. You know, and really what comes out of it really, as much as the physical inactivity, and Catherine has mentioned, it is actually the sedentary behavior as well. You're talking about high rates of sedentary behavior. So there might be in some HSE context a physical activity initiative that people can get involved with, but outside of that, then you're talking about 8, 9, 10 hours of sedentary behavior a day. And that's something that we saw in research that we've done, not published. And that would compare against the international literature as well. It's a high level of sedentary behavior that we would see. So look, in the Irish context, and I've written on this or tried to be critical of this, a vision for change in 2006, very little to address physical health within the national policy in Ireland. Now, things have improved with sharing a vision, but I think there's still work to go there in the context of the strength of the evidence and the focus. As Catherine has said, we're talking about the leading cause of early mortality in this population. So the strength of the focus is perhaps not reflected in our mental health policy, maybe, in my opinion. So there's work to be done there. In terms of services, in Ireland, delivering on physical activity or implementing physical activity in their services, they do have some resources. They do have mental health commissions, Regulation 9, particularly around recreation activities. So that's impetus there for services to engage in physical activity. And there is some guidelines. Julie Broderick and colleagues produced some guidelines around physical activity in the Irish services. But again, it's very much what I would call working at the interpersonal level and interpersonal levels, which I'll talk about in a little bit later on. But you know, there's impetus, but then as Mairead, I don't know why that's not staying with Mairead, apologies. As Mairead is saying, where do you go from there? What do you do on Monday morning when you come into work? How do you use those? And that's where the problem is. So we can't also neglect the fact as well that at the personal level, and I think Jackie Hargreaves, and we've done some work on this as well, there are huge personal barriers to engaging in physical activity that we all have to acknowledge as well if you have a severe mental illness. That goes without saying. But then when we talk to service providers and we look at things beyond the personal and the interpersonal level, we see things around the built environment in our services as well, which become a huge problem. So you're talking, in some cases, old buildings. There's St. Alfred's in Waterford, and they've tried to create some recreational space out of an old church. But then even within our new built facilities, for example, in Wexford, have rarely been built with physical activity in mind or consideration of how physical activity could be enabled through the built environment. And then further as well, even in talking to service providers, and this is mentioned by a few people today, and we'll talk, it goes back to that EPA guidance and Joe's message of delivered by someone who's an expert in physical activity. We have this issue as well around perceptions of risk with physical activity, a concern of how do I prescribe physical activity, or how do I advise on physical activity if I haven't got the training or the expertise, or if I haven't got someone that I can advise someone else to go and speak to. So we've got all these issues that we've looked at. Earlier work, I'm not terribly keen on the word obesogenic environment, but this being described as an obesogenic environment in previous literature as well, and looking at, this is our mental health services. And I'm going to speak about this project that we've done in Wexford Mental Health Services, where we embedded an exercise practitioner in services. That's actually a novel thing in Ireland, by the way. It's not in other contexts, but it is in Ireland. And you can see here Anna, our exercise practitioner, working with clients with COVID, obviously, being in the context. And what you have is working in an environment that's not conducive to supporting physical activity and exercise. So that's a problem. So this project, as I said, it was funded by Sláintecare. We kind of want to grasp the net and we go, well, why in HSE Mental Health Services do we not have exercise or the capacity for exercise practitioners to work in services? As per our colleagues in the UK have it in some cases, and globally that is the case as well. So we tried to address that. So using Sláintecare funding, we undertook this. We only had, when we started off the pilot, we only had room for one exercise practitioner. And then for the sake of equity, because much like what Catherine and Tara have tried to do, we brought a multi-stakeholder group together. And then for the sake of equity, we had to have the person work across rehab and recovery, community, CAMS, psych later life. So the person was stretched way too thin, which came out in the evaluation. But anyway, and we formed a multi-agency steering group, which I'll talk about the importance of that. And we developed the operating procedures, the protocols, the agreements. There was a challenge with actually having the HSE hire an exercise professional. So we had to hire them through the local sports partnership, Sports Active Wexford. And then this working group, the steering group, developed the agreements and procedures for the person to actually work as part of the multidisciplinary team, to have input to multidisciplinary care meetings, to review patient notes, etc. So that was the work of the steering group. That's available for anyone who wants it as well. You can have that information. We're more than happy to share for the good of the cause, let's say. And the practitioner, Anna, she delivered 8 weeks interventions, multi-component physical activity interventions. COVID impacted the multiple blocks. So there was telehealth interventions delivered as well as part of that. And we in SETU evaluated the work using REAIM. So overall, the course of the project, we see 46 service users completing 8 weeks of physical activity intervention. So good. Look, you won't be surprised to learn the outcomes. I'll just fly through it because I'm watching the clock. But increased physical activity levels across the board. So using the SIMPAC. So there's some nuanced lessons in this that are important to take forward for further projects in Ireland as well, such as what outcome measures to focus on, what's potentially going to change, and what are the measures to that will actually be sensitive enough to detect changes as well. So for example, SIMPAC tool is designed specifically for people with mental health problems, as opposed to more general population monitoring of physical activity, such as like IPAC tools. So physical activity and centered behavior change, improve, and mood and well-being scores improved as well at a significant level across the people that took part. Okay, granted, it was not a randomized control trial, but it's that said, we saw very good quantitative outcomes in our data. We also, part of this as well, this is about grassing the net with this project and actually embedding exercise practitioners in HSE services. So we wanted to understand process outcomes as well, and other factors that are important to the process. So for example, looking at some of the kind of hidden outcomes as well, we see what, for example, service users that were not engaging with traditional services that were available. Through physical activity, we were providing gateway therapeutic access to different services. So they were starting to have conversations that were creating connections with other mental health service providers. We see obviously increased motivation for physical activity, increased confidence around physical activity, and that's a big thing actually in a lot of ways. When you're talking about someone who mightn't have exercised for years or exercised at all, and starting to engage with community-based resources around physical activity, but having the confidence to actually approach it. So having the support at the initial stage of physical activity and then being able to actually autonomously drive physical activity themselves in a community setting is a huge thing as well for sustaining and maintaining physical activity. There are some fundamental things that help this. Having key champions on the ground is a great thing. So having the HSE involved in Aclú as well is going to be very, very important. You need champions on the ground. You do need people that are going to drive this. You need energy. You also need management buy-in and consultant level buy-in as well. That was a big factor. And look, when you change the way things are, or you change the norm, you start to shift the paradigm, as I think was said earlier. People do have, fear around risk and fear around how this might impact them or so on. So there is work to be done in about engaging multidisciplinary teams involved, bringing them along in the process too. And those are lessons that we learned too. And coming back then to the technology piece as well. A lot of what we found with that, because we had to go online for 2 of the blocks with the physical activity intervention, using Zoom and WhatsApp to deliver health coaching and physical activity exercise in one-to-one. And young people actually really, really adapted very, very nicely and engaged with it perfectly. And we found that young people actually really enjoyed the online intervention. There was, as was mentioned earlier, some challenges to be overcome with some of the people in rehabilitation and recovery services where they didn't have a phone, or they didn't have a phone that was had the capacity to go online. Look, that's a very busy slide, so I'll just kind of quickly summarize some of the kind of recommendations there. The multi-agency approach was key to this, having the steering group working together, bringing together heads from different places, and looking at, what are the outcomes that we need to look at? What is actually likely to change as well. And if you want sustainability of funding, you want to focus on the outcomes that you know are going to actually move through exercise, through the work of Kelly and Joe in laying down the evidence early on. Preparation of the multidisciplinary teams as well. As we said, if you're going to go into multidisciplinary mental health teams, you need to work with them and bring them along in the process as well. The champions, the management. There are processes, and we've looked at these as well in terms of if you're trying to use an exercise practitioner as well around referral and things like that that we have developed. As well, look, this obviously we're based, a lot of this work was based in rehab and recovery and also other clinical settings as well. But it is important that there's a community focus and a community level engagement to it as well, and that you're supporting people to be physically active in the community. I'm nearly there, stay with me. So just some take home things as well. As I said, it's about, and this is one of the strengths I think of Aclú as well. It's empowering and mobilizing individuals, bringing them together, engaging the key stakeholders that are involved in this process. That's how we move people. That's how we move the process. This is a process. I talked about grasping the nettle earlier, but we are making strides. We have made strides in the last 5-10 years. The piece around co-design work, which we've done some work on, is very important, because if we look at promoting visibility, we do need to approach it from a multi-level approach. And the co-design is very, very effective for making small nuanced changes at a local contextual level. That's really, really important for visibility interventions, particularly about people who, as I mentioned earlier, at a personal level, have a number of challenges to overcome with engaging this. And as experts or as clinicians, we assume sometimes we know what people are experiencing with the likes of a physical intervention, but we actually don't know what it looks like. And Glenn Robert won't mind me using a picture from his book, because this is a piece we did around experience-based co-design for visibility development. We don't know what it's like until we've been on the other side of the fence, and we may never be on the other side of the fence. And something as simple as, and it was brought up in some of the earlier work with this project, was I don't want to arrive to a recreational center in public on a big bus with a disability sticker on the front of it. That's stigmatizing for me. There has to be another way. So these are sometimes conceptions that we have around visibility implementation that we haven't thought about fully from the perspective of the service user. So that co-design piece is really, really important, and it's a credit to Aclú as well to be looking at that. Engaging external partners as well, bringing in new ideas from the outside is very, very important. And look, as well, I talk about the national base. I talk about the dearth of visibility evidence for mental health in the national context. Hopefully this project will help to drive some more evidence around that. We can start to build a picture, because that's fundamentally how we get ongoing funding for this area is to drive evidence in the field. The infrastructure in the built environment, that's going to be a slow process. But look, if we're going to really tackle positivity and exercise and provide that as part of routine care in HSC services, we're going to have to look at that. And that I'm talking about retro building or retrofitting buildings, but also about, we need to be part of the conversation with new developments as well. And there are plenty of new developments happening nationally. We need to be bringing visibility to the agenda of that as well. And look, it's another piece, the exercise professional side of things, working in services, but our third level institutions need to run with this and look at how we kind of build accreditation around mental health and prescribing exercise for mental health populations as well. So there are avenues. That's the exercise garden colleagues and I worked on in Enniscorthy. So we put a small activity garden. So that's just kind of emphasizing the point about let's look at the built environment too and make physicality a norm in our services. And look, this is not novel to the international world, but in a lot of HSC services, this is some stuff that we have some catch up to do. Just again, like Joe, I'm 1 minute over time. But I would like to acknowledge a few people as well that I would do a lot of work with that, it's part of a team. Suzanne Deneve, Michael Harrison, colleagues in HSC services, Sports Active Wexford as well. And of course, the Aclú team. Sorry, Tara, I haven't got your name on it there, but as well for your accommodation and the invite today as well. And that's Waterford at Night to close the service or the speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. So some great examples of what you did there in the Southeast, and lots of things that we're indeed trying to replicate and can learn from in Aclú. So we're delighted to hear about all those initiatives today. And absolutely, I suppose from the fitness professional, we mentioned UFIT earlier, and I know Gerard, Susan and May are probably going to get ready for our breakout rooms, which we're going to head into in a minute. But our fitness, you know, you mentioned the bus and the stigma and whatever else. And so one reason why we chose the UFIT module, I suppose the UFIT program, to look at the kind of brand under which we'll offer the physical activity is because it's about everybody fitting in. And we offer it to lots of different population groups, not just isolated for those with enduring mental illness. So we felt that that was nice for this population group to be part of something bigger that is a global movement that we run with a global industry body. But obviously when it happens, it's in local community centres or wherever it might be. And it might be walking in a woods, it might be building a boat, it might be something very different to a gym for now, for somebody, it might be at home. So that's about the co-design process and what people want as well. So we'll very much take that into account in our design. So thanks for, I think we have a massive amount of fantastic information from our 3 keynote guests. So thank you so much. I think it'll take people time to digest that when they go back over the recording, they go back over the slides, but like what a wealth of information you've given us today. And we're absolutely delighted with that and thrilled that you're joining on the external advisory group to continue with that process of sharing and developing together for the greater good, as Evan said. And we look forward to that really. And thank you all very much for the effort you took and in joining us today and for sharing that valuable information. So now we're on to the next slide. This is just a summary slide, which I'll bring back up. We're going into a little breakout. I know our room, the number of people in the room has dropped a small bit, which is great, gives everybody a chance to input into the discussion more should they wish to. Our intention is we have 3 online groups at the moment. So some of our colleagues have just exited to manage this process online. And in the room, we can have 3 small groups to discuss these questions. What's the problem? You know, as in, why haven't we seen the change that has been called for many years so far? Evan gave great examples of what's happened in the Southeast, but it's not wholesale. Mairead gave great examples of the pilot in the Southwest, but again, it's not wholesale. So what's the problem? What do we need to do to create the solution? What's needed for each stakeholder? You mentioned universities, what they can do. Universities, services, the system, research, whatever it might be. What are the barriers and how do we address them? How do we make this sustainable and how do we scale? So there are questions, and in this room, we're going to split up a little bit and just have a little bit of discussion. So Tara's going to take one group. One of our keynotes is with each group. So Kelly, I think you're going to pair up with Tara there, and you can have your group maybe up here. And Mairead, if you want to stay with that group, we'll have one of our HSE colleagues in each group as well. Joe and I will go over here maybe, and who's Elaine, do you want to come with us? And Evan, you're going to go with Sarah, and we'll have John O'Keefe will go with the 2 of you. So as for the rest of you, just find your group. If your group is small, that's great. You'll have plenty of time to chat, to discuss, to explore what the options are. Okay, and then we'll have a little bit of feedback from the groups, and hopefully we will finish up pretty close to our target deadline of 5 o'clock. So thanks, everyone. Okay, let's start with some feedback from the room.
I suppose we started with what's the problem, and we asked the clinician. Really, we went with Mairead, and fundamentally is that there's nowhere to talk about physical health for clinicians, right up to the point until the person then becomes sick. That's when they can start talking, which is too late. Which I think everyone was talking about in the whole preventative approach, and Joe mentioned it as well. So we know that through lived experience from the HSE service users that they want to do such initiatives, but when the clinicians themselves have got nobody to talk to about their physical health, about the clients that are using the services, if there's nobody there for them to talk to, where do they go? That was the problem we talked about. Who is needed to create solutions? Well, that's where Kelly came in with identifying Mairead as a champion. And that's what we need. We need more Maireads, we need more champions out there. And this idea then of to create these solutions, these champions need to be able to network and connect with other people that are out there who are also champions, or not necessarily champions, willing to collaborate, and then using each other's experiences to help each other out. So before we talked about the Court Sports Partnership and the CARA organisation, how those that are working in the CARA organisation can help the sports partnership out, and vice versa. So you've got this collaboration that's created that both gets a win-win out of it, and the service user fundamentally gets the benefit. But that way, they're not losing out. No one's creating more work for each other. You're actually helping each other out. So that's what we were saying. We needed that to create solutions. And by doing so, we talked a lot about implementation science, figuring out how to create champions in organizations. So that's an implementation strategy. And what the champion needs is to have leadership support in their organization to do that successfully. And then that way you then also implement the sustainability angle. Sorry, I'm skipping here, about the handoff and training and manuals. And this idea that if Mairead unfortunately moved on to another organisation, there is someone else there that she's trained up that is able to continue the initiative and pass it on or hand off to others. A manual is also in CARA, that's what they've got, a manual that can literally be handed over to somebody else. The other angles was what's needed for each stakeholder to bring. So that's, we talked a little bit about that. We talked about using collaboration with the other organisations, but also using education facilities, so higher education, schools, about going into these places and bringing Breeder's idea about entrepreneurship into that. How can these young people that are in college learning about these initiatives, what do they think that we could do? And this idea is about bringing in fresh minds, because you've got these people that are working in the front line, like Mairead, they've got to do their day job. They're not, thinking outside the box is brilliant that she's done that. But, most people get emails every day that they're trading through, they have no time to respond to that. So this idea that linking in third level institutions, secondary schools, this idea that other people are there that can actually bring in, generate entrepreneurial projects as part of their family year project, maybe, things like that. What else did we say? Yeah, we had an example in our group about a really exciting initiative that's been called Active Helping Me. Is that right? Did I get that right? Yeah, Active Helping Me. And again, this is something that's going on that we don't even know about. And this idea that you've got the train the trainer approach, or you've got this initiative that's building in online resources for people to go into schools or other organisations to use, but also this idea that after a few weeks or quarterly, you've got skills for practice where someone from CARA goes in and gives them little bits of training if they want it. So it keeps the initiative going. We also finally talked about more networking opportunities like this. It's really important. Like, we've all just had a small little group session there, and I think for us it was fantastic to hear about what other people are doing and ideas. Obviously these cost money, but the idea of digital, like the fact that we meet every week, and as I said, we have fun on those meeting calls. It's not all about just talking about what we have to do, like we're learning about each other and networking that way. So maybe more of these opportunities to network online in these breakout rooms, etc. But fundamentally, we said we need to build implementation science from the beginning. Think beyond the intervention in the context. Is this replicable? So we had one really nice example that Mairead was talking about with a guy who had really low energy for a long time. He wasn't being physically active. So what they did in their garden initiative was get him to mind the chickens. And by him minding the chickens, it gave him value. The chickens needed him, and he felt bad if he didn't feed the chickens. So it gave him energy, gave him focus, and it gave him physical activity at the same time. And that way it was something that he was empowered to do, but also not just telling him to be active or telling him to eat better. It was giving him a value and a role. So this idea about building implementation science from the beginning, but also getting the experiences of people like Mairead. We've got 30 years of experience of working with these individuals about how do we empower them to make them change themselves. I think that's.
Thank you, Tara. Okay, that's great. You had a lot of good discussion there in your group. We'll go over to the second group. So Sarah, your group, I'm not sure who was delivering the feedback from your group, but we'd be really keen to hear it. Okay.
Thanks very much. I think we had a good discussion. We started with kind of the problems and the barriers from the real kind of physical barriers, like talking about the bossy kind of stigmatizing barriers, and it quite quickly conversation about the connections we need and the stakeholders we need, and why aren't certain people working together as much as they could be, why where they are, how do we scale that where there are existing good initiatives. So we had questions on why weren't physical activity professionals hired by the HSE directly, why wasn't it more integrated. We had a very good local example where some mental health professionals are training as physical activity professionals to bring these together. So I think we looked quite a bit at what in this space where there are maybe regional and local initiatives. How do we scale them and get them into national programs and policies? And also how do we make sure the right people are talking to each other so that it isn't kind of falling back on the service user to go out and make these connections, how they can how it can be better integrated so it's more seamless for the service user.
Yeah, not much to add, and a lot of similarity probably with what you guys spoke about. We talked well. I probably talked a bit, and other people talked like actually having an identity for this, or being a place of a national point for other services. Lots of people are doing things in the services and they want help, they want resources, and resources could be, well, not always money, it can be just guidance on how do I approach this or what's the best way of doing it. So actually it could be an identity for that, or a point of reference for people. And even like, because there's so many people working in different organizations in our group that have an interest or a responsibility around this, but actually maybe brings them together and links them together for that conversation.
Just a few other points I think we touched on was what the role for the digital space is here. So it was mentioned not that we shouldn't work with these groups, but some of the people in the most disadvantaged groups don't particularly work in the digital space, and it's really a case of knocking on doors and getting people to come out, literally knocking on the doors to get them to come out and participate. So while we should explore this digital space, maybe also digital space for the other stakeholders to collaborate in as well. And there was also, we talked a bit about how when we feel there were quite a few good initiatives, and to get them scaled up, we need to prove it and the measurements. But what exactly are you measuring and how? When what we're looking at is quite qualitative, but there's a lot of focus on data and metrics. So how we would look at those as well, with some problems we looked at, and how we would integrate this for scaling up and sustainability.
Designing physical space, I think Evan was saying as well that perhaps bring in the planners and the various people representing the council, so that when you are designing, that they also get the buy-in, so it's not too late and the building isn't up and ready and done and dusted, and that can't happen. I think that was just a very important point brought forward.
Thanks, Brita. Okay, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Evan. That's great feedback from your group. So we appreciate that. And to your point there about the story, or at the end there, N equals 1, that individual story of one person's case, one case study, that's very important too. So it's not, like there's so much we can learn from individuals and their experience. We shouldn't bypass that in fitting the bits of this puzzle together, I suppose, to come up with good solutions. So everyone's story is relevant in this context, and listening carefully to people and their experiences will help us make better solutions. Okay, so we've one group left, and Elaine, you're the nominated speaker for our group 3 here before we join our online feedback.
Again, if any of my group want to chime in if I'm missing anything. So in terms of problems, we've discussed the piece around education, I suppose maybe just acknowledging the effects that medication have around how I suppose the sedating effect was one we mentioned in particular, and how that can really make it difficult, I suppose, to engage in physical activity, work with professionals or otherwise. To, I suppose, the issues around consent, and I suppose bringing in that human rights perspective, that having, I suppose, a case by case approach, person-centered approach, and like I suppose particularly I think it was mentioned around group exercise pieces as opposed to individual work. Obviously that, I suppose, incorporating consent into that, what the person would choose, I suppose, if they were engaged in a conversation about that. Other issues then around like embedding professionals, fitness professionals into the system, or maybe not to do that and have that piece outsourced or kind of subcontracted and have that more embedded in the community. And then how do you even go about, I suppose, deciding what's an appropriately specialist training to have in that, I suppose, discipline, and how to remunerate those people appropriately as well. Then I suppose just in terms of like a macro level piece around kind of viewing like the work we're doing with Aclú, I suppose, as a cog in a wider wheel of strategic change that requires societal buy-in. And again, I suppose the possibility of linking and maybe using, I suppose, or developing a collaboration with kind of pharmaceutical companies who might have an interest in funding or participating in some way in advancing kind of physical health interventions. Yeah, I don't know if anyone of my group wants to add anything there.
I think you've captured it well, unless anyone wants to add. Nope. Okay, thank you, Elaine. That's great. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hopefully go back to the people in the room. Okay, Susan, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, I can. So May and I will give the feedback from our group. So I'm going to start. So just to give you an idea of who was in the room, we had people from a research background, an academic background, from a coaching and the volunteer sector. So we had a nice mix of people, and I suppose we got waylaid in the first couple of points, so we didn't quite make our way through them all, but nonetheless we had a very interesting conversation with a diversity of opinion and personal experience as well. So in terms of the problem, despite all the conversations around mental health and how prominent it is, there's still a stigma associated with it. So people feel nearly they need permission to talk about their own mental health, and they need to give themselves permission and get permission from others to discuss mental health, and in particular their own. And service accessibility was another issue. So trying to get access initially to initial services, and then trying to get access to the right service. And the first point of call is your GP, and there's often medication is put forward maybe as the first and only solution for anyone suffering with mental illness. And you know, we need to take a holistic approach to it, but again, it's the service accessibility to try and get that holistic approach to it. So that in itself is a limiting factor. And I suppose, you know, people having that service accessibility and trying to get your foot in the door and trying to treat your own mental health is a huge barrier. And another point that was raised was that we're often dismissive of our own mental health, and you know that can cause us to be dismissive then of others. So that in itself is another problem, and it's the language around mental health and how we articulate it, and you know what's that shared language. So language in its while multilingual solutions, you know, are one option, but it's that shared common understanding. So how do we talk about it so everyone can understand, you know, this shared terminology around mental health? And, you know, there's an education piece needed around that. And I suppose in terms of who's needed to create the solution, one of our participants mentioned this holistic approach, and part of that holistic approach has to be the patient and their family. So not just to restrict it to the patient. So we need the broader family involved. so that everyone, I suppose, first of all, understands the challenges that individual is dealing with, and that they become part of the solution themselves and trying to support that individual as they hopefully build a pathway to recovery, or at least managing their illness. So I think that was it from my perspective. May, if you want to add some more.
Yeah, just from the group, we also had a really novel idea that, you know, if people with enduring mental illness are engaging with programs, then we need to use them as mentors as well. And that's a huge opportunity. So that came from Claire in France. And just to further reiterate Susan's point, there was a strong emphasis on engaging with the families, that perhaps we only engage with individuals and then maybe they're dropping out, that we have to look at the family. And maybe, Debbie, you made a great point that it's a cultural change perhaps in Ireland, that we don't just engage with the individual, that we go to the family or the unit of that person as well, so that they can be there to support and assist them in their therapy.
Thank you. Great feedback there from your group, and thanks to everyone who contributed to that. Comprehensive coverage of your feedback anyway, so thank you very much for that. We'll collate all the feedback, and I know there have been a number of comments come in as well in the chat and in other areas. So yeah, so that's great. So we'll take on board all this feedback and write it up in a report and integrate it into, I suppose, our next meeting and discussions. So thank you. We've obviously ran well over time, as I mentioned earlier. I think testament to the interest for those of you who have lasted the test of time. Thank you to everyone who was involved who came today and who's been involved in our event online and in the room. Thanks to everyone who's been involved in the organization. I know Brita has left the room from the point of view of the funding, which we mentioned earlier. Sarah has been, we couldn't have got here today without Sarah's input over the last number of weeks as well. So sincere thanks to Sarah for all her input in coordinating today as well. Thanks to all our steering committee and their dedication and attention every week in getting involved, and to Tara as well as co-lead, I suppose, of this project. I mean, there's been a huge amount of work behind the scenes in the project, and Mairead, and lots more work to be done. We're very well aware of it and willing and interested to take it on. So yeah, we're really keen for that. Thanks to Jim and Liam down the back, and thanks so much for your support. And I've heard from many people who've been in the online environment that whatever technical issues we may have faced in the room they were oblivious to it. So, sincere thanks for that. And I know the recording will be great as well, and we'll have that as an asset to share. Personally, I definitely want to go back over it myself, even there was so much information shared today. So I look forward to going back over the recording, whatever, about the many people who told us that they wouldn't make it, but they'd love to have the recording. So thank you very much for all your efforts today. Thanks to everyone in the UNESCO Chair team. Thanks to Aisling, who's from the US, been keeping the things going in the technical end on her end, and to the three who are over there in the UNESCO Chair offices doing the digital piece. So Tara, I don't know if there's anyone else we've left out in this mix. Our external advisory group meet tomorrow, as we said, and thanks to all of them as well for showing up today. So thank you, everyone. I think it's time we put a close to the proceedings today, and we are really thankful to you for joining us.